that I agreed to do this speech tonight. Then I looked at the beginning of this book which I'm carrying with me, which is something that I found on the bookshelves of my mother-in-law a few years ago. And this is the reason that I'm here tonight and I agreed to do this. It's a remarkable book. It's a collection of Robbie Burns' poems, songs and correspondence, a typical book of its time, and it was given to my mother-in-law's mother on the occasion of her 17th birthday, almost exactly 100 years ago this month. This, yes, thank you. Now, this book was also accompanied by some other interesting books on this bookshelf. One of the others was The Ladies' Journal, which was a book somewhat older than this one, and which dealt with the education of young ladies. Now, although I'm here to talk about Burns, I thought I would start with a little bit about the Ladies' Guide and what it contained. This book was written in 1893 and was given to the mother of the lady who received this book, presumably when she was pregnant with Etna. The male author of this very disturbing in some ways book has very strong views on the evils of novel reading. He states that reading of a character to stimulate the emotions and rouse the passions may produce a tendency to uterine congestion, weak backs, and painful menstruation. Then he goes on to poetry, so you can imagine where we lead to. On the subject of poetry, he says, "We have felt our cheeks burn more than once when we have seen young schoolgirls intently poring over the amorous ditties of Burns or Byron." So who was this man, Burns, who caused so much concern to the conservative Victorians? Burns was born in 1759 into a farming family. His father was a rather unsuccessful tenant farmer in Ayrshire. And so of necessity, Burns soon learned to plough, to thrash, and to perform all the other duties on a farm in Scotland. He composed his first poem when he was 15, to Hanson Nell, another labourer in his father's field. This begins, "Oh, once I loved a bonny lass, aye, and I love her still, and whilst that virtue warms my breast, I'll love my Hanson Nell." Now, what young teenage girl in 18th century Scotland could resist such an approach? Unsurprisingly, perhaps, Burns went on to become equally proficient at writing poetry, courting ladies, and siring a number of illegitimate children. In his late 20s, after his father's death, and an unsuccessful venture with his brother into farming, Burns' impending bankruptcy was averted by the successful publishing of a first volume of his poems. So he left Ayrshire and he went to Edinburgh, where he was feted in high society as the inspired ploughman. From the proceeds of his publishing, he was able to lease a farm in Dumfries, where he settled with his new bride, Jean Armour, the mother of 2 of his illegitimate children. Only 2 years later, he admitted to more ruinous farming, but at the same time, he had been writing inspired poetry, including the sublime "To Mary in Heaven" and the famous Tam O'Shanter. I will try to give you a flavour for his marvellous poetry, and may the Scots present please excuse my Sassenach accent. but I will read a few of the lines from the two poems that I've just mentioned. Firstly, Tam O'Shanter, where Burns starts by putting us all in the place of simple farmers drinking their ale after a day at the market, whilst other folks are packing up and leaving for home.